Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, May 18th, 2023. With 2 weeks to go until a possible U.S. default on its national debt, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says about the talks between his office and the White House on raising the debt ceiling, "I think we have a structure now and everybody's working hard." And he says he would like the House to vote on a bill next week. Senate Banking Committee ranking Republican Tim Scott calling for firings at the Federal Reserve over the agency's failure to take steps that could have prevented the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. President Joe Biden meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister in Hiroshima, Japan, as the group of 7 country leaders gather for a summit to discuss the world economy, China, Russia, and other issues. U.S. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene introduces articles of impeachment against President Biden, saying he has deliberately compromised our national security by refusing to enforce immigration laws and secure our border. She's also seeking to impeach the FBI Director, Attorney General, Homeland Security Secretary, and U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. And a House subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government hears from FBI whistleblowers who say they were suspended or had their security clearances revoked for speaking out against what they call politicized rot at the FBI. But subcommittee Democrats say the hearing is an attempt to minimize the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Story from CNBC. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said Thursday that he is optimistic that congressional negotiators could reach a deal to raise or suspend the debt ceiling in time to hold a House vote on it next week. Speaker McCarthy spoke as a small group of White House negotiators met on Capitol Hill with the Speaker's team to hammer out a deal that's able to pass the Republican-majority House and the Democratic-controlled Senate ahead of a potential June 1st deadline, the soonest date the Treasury Department could run out of cash to pay debts already incurred. That from CNBC. CNN reporter Manu Raju posted some of the exchange between the reporters and Speaker McCarthy.
I think so. I had a discussion with Senator Schumer when we were at the White House about timing before we were going to meet. I said, look, I'm calculating like 11 days like 4 days for the House, 7 days for the Senate. He didn't think it would take as much as 7 days, but we'll continue as we negotiate and communicate with that, see the time period. But yeah, like I've always said before, it would be important to try to have the agreement, especially in principle, by sometime this weekend.
Is that possible at this point? Because
the Senate just put our bill on the floor. It's done.
No, but in the negotiations, you guys closed the gap.
Look, we're not there. We haven't agreed to anything yet, but I see the path that we could come to an agreement. And I think we have a structure now, and everybody's working hard. And we're working 2 or 3 times a day, then going back, getting more numbers. I think I have the greatest respect for Shalonda and for Rachetti. They are exceptionally smart. They're tough. They are strong in their beliefs on the Democratic side, just as who we have in the room. And so the thing is, it's very professional how this discussion is. If we had this 97 days ago, we would have something else.
Talk about the structure. Is it largely a lot of the same things that you guys have been talking about today?
We're talking about everything in there. It's not been official sitting here at the top of the press what everybody's talking about, but they're working through it in a very professional manner, see where we can be able to raise the debt ceiling, take the concerns of what the House has and others, and put a bill together that will become law.
But it's fair to say work requirements is still part of the discussion.
Look, we're talking about all the different items.
By structure, do you mean as a framework, at least, that you're working off of?
Look, we talk about all the different. I don't think it's productive if you go write something and everybody people aren't in there all gets mad at one thing. I know, but people still read your stuff.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, speaking with reporters in the U.S. Capitol building today. And with his brighter outlook on the possibility of a debt ceiling deal and a House vote as soon as next week, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said on the Senate floor today that senators who plan to be on recess next week should be prepared to return to Washington.
The negotiations are currently making progress. As Speaker McCarthy has said, he expects the House will vote next week if an agreement is reached, and the Senate would begin consideration after that. Following the vote on the Abudu nomination, members should remain aware and be able to return to the Senate within a 24-hour period to fulfill our responsibilities to avoid default.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. NBC News reported this morning that Vice President Kamala Harris is taking on a larger role in the White House's efforts to talk to the public about the need to raise the debt ceiling, but thus far there is no indication she will be involved in daily negotiations. They write that on Thursday, Vice President Harris scheduled to speak virtually to thousands of community leaders about the importance of lifting the debt ceiling and the dangers of default, according to a senior administration official. The briefing, where Vice President Harris is expected to provide an update on possible default and the potential economic consequences if the ceiling isn't lifted, underscores an emerging role for the Vice President as the White House looks to deploy her to explain what many Americans see as a complicated economic issue. That, according to a senior administration official speaking to NBC News. Later in the day, she did hold that briefing. It was audio only. Here's the Vice President.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us today. You can hear I have a bit of a frog in my throat. Please forgive me. I've been talking about this issue a lot recently. On this call, we have community leaders, labor leaders, state and local elected officials representing all 50 states and the territories. And you all are on this call. So obviously, because you are leaders in your communities, and you stay informed about what is happening. And for that reason, people turn to you when they need to understand and make sense of it all. So today we have come together to address a subject that impacts the life of every American, the debt ceiling, to make sure America does not default on its debt. As you all know, Republicans in Congress have threatened to cause the United States to default on paying its debt. A default would be unprecedented. It has never happened before. It would mean, if it happens, that it would be the first time in history that the United States government would not pay its bills. Now, congressional Republicans claim they are threatening default because they want to lower our nation's debt. Okay, so let's be clear. For Republicans in Congress, this issue is not really about lowering our nation's debt, because if they really cared about lowering our debt, they would not also fight to protect trillions of dollars in Trump tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and the biggest corporations.
Vice President Kamala Harris in an online audio briefing with those civil rights groups, labor organizations, and state and local elected officials today. The House Freedom Caucus has put out a statement calling on Speaker McCarthy and Senate Republicans to use every leverage and tool at their disposal to ensure the Limit, Save, Grow Act is signed into law. That was the bill that was recently passed by the House that combined the raising of the debt ceiling with spending cuts and other provisions. The Freedom Caucus writes there should be no further discussion until the Senate passes the legislation. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has called that bill dead on arrival in the Senate. From Politico, the White House has maintained that it's negotiating on budget and spending issues separately from the debt ceiling, a position that's becoming harder and harder to maintain as talks ramp up. House Republicans' bill to lift the debt limit passed last month also cut $130 billion from federal spending, in addition to imposing a decade of overall funding restrictions, tougher work requirements for federal benefits, and more. The Biden administration, meanwhile, has signaled support for a shorter budget deal, possibly in the realm of 2 years, in addition to some flexibility on work requirements, although not for federal health programs. Both sides have expressed an interest in attaching energy permitting reforms to a broader budget deal. That reporting from Politico. On the Senate floor today, Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the minority whip, talking in support of what the House Republicans have done.
Speaker McCarthy's been ready to negotiate for months, and the president should have engaged seriously months ago. But, Mr. President, better late than never. And I hope over the next few days the two sides will be able to swiftly reach an agreement. A good place to start would be with a good long look at the policies in the House Republicans' Limit, Save, Grow Act, which pairs a debt ceiling increase with common sense spending reforms, things like reclaiming unspent COVID money, modestly strengthening work requirements in federal entitlement programs for able-bodied Americans. A move, I might add, supported by more than 60% of the American public in order to help individuals move from welfare to work. Capping discretionary spending for next year at the fiscal year 2022 discretionary spending level, the same level we were successfully operating at mere months ago. Repealing the green energy subsidies in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, whose estimated cost has ballooned since the bill was passed. Passing permitting reform, a bipartisan priority to help get both conventional and green energy projects off the ground more quickly, which could help grow our economy. Repealing the president's reckless student loan giveaway, which could otherwise end up costing American taxpayers close to $1 trillion, and other common sense measures. Mr. President, the provisions of the Limit, Save, Grow Act have been the subject of a lot of fear-mongering from Democrats who have been set against including any spending reforms as part of a debt ceiling package. But these are responsible ideas worthy of consideration as part of a debt ceiling agreement, or for that matter, in any other context.
Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the minority whip today on the Senate floor. A group of 5 Senate Democratic caucus members have sent President Biden a letter urging him to use the 14th Amendment to the Constitution to avoid having to make the choice between defaulting on the debt and going along with the Republican positions on spending cuts and new work requirements on federal aid programs. They held a news conference today led by Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont.
And they have made it clear that they are prepared to hold our entire economy hostage unless the president gives in to all of their demands. And this is something we cannot accept. In my view, and the view of all of us up here, the president has the authority and the responsibility under the Constitution to make sure that we continue to pay our bills. In fact, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution clearly states, quote, it's not ambiguous, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned, end quote. Is this a perfect solution? Is imposing the 14th Amendment a perfect solution? No, it is not. But using the 14th Amendment would allow the United States to continue to pay its bills on time and without delay, prevent an economic catastrophe, and prevent devastating cuts to some of the most vulnerable people in this country. It should be exercised if necessary.
Senator Bernie Sanders, who caucuses with the Senate Democrats, although his party is officially independent, joining the Senate Democrats at a news conference today. A bipartisan bill introduced in the House today would prevent members of Congress from being paid if the U.S. defaults on the debt. It's sponsored by Abigail Spanberger, Democrat from Virginia, and Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican from Pennsylvania, entitled No Pay for Congress During Default or Shutdown Act. On Wall Street, the Dow up 115, NASDAQ up 188, S&P up 39. Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, writes ABC News, on Thursday called for firings at the Federal Reserve over the central bank's failure to regulate Silicon Valley Bank in the run-up to its collapse. The imperative from Senator Scott came during Senate testimony from Michael Barr, the Fed's vice chair for supervision, who faced scrutiny from members of both major parties over his admitted failure to lead proper oversight of Silicon Valley Bank. Michael Barr authored a report last month that faulted the Fed's lax oversight and an inability to anticipate the systemic threat posed by the bank's failure. The exchange began with Senator Scott, ranking Republican on the Banking Committee, saying those at fault are not accepting responsibility.
Listening to this hearing, I think the American people may be asking themselves, what is the definition of scapegoat? If we were looking for a definition of scapegoat, please watch this hearing, because literally what we're hearing today is scapegoating. I keep hearing about the predecessor, who left in December 21. Mr. Barr, you started in July 2022. According to Ms. Hewitt, the liquidity and interest rate risk manifested itself in 2021, which means it was already there. Coming into a new job, you have an opportunity to take responsibility for a very important role in maintaining strength and health in our financial system. yet we continue to hear about the predecessor. One of the most important values of being an American is taking responsibility. It's that simple. When I was a kid, not doing well in high school, I wanted to blame somebody else for my failures. Wanted to blame my mom because she was working long hours, my dad because he was not around. But you know, I had a mentor who taught me, actually, look in the mirror, blame yourself. Because if you want to find the solution, you've got to find the problem.
Senator Tim Scott at today's Banking Committee hearing on the recent bank collapses. One of the witnesses, Federal Reserve Vice Chair Michael Barr, responded to the senator.
Let me be absolutely clear. I accept full responsibility with respect to the supervisory failings at the Federal Reserve. I have been clear about that from the start, and I remain clear about that today.
Thank you, Mr. Barr.
The buck stops here.
Thank you.
And I am committed to fixing the problems that we've had in supervision and regulation going forward.
Thank you, sir. Who did you fire?
We have not fired someone as a result of this review.
Thank you.
We plan to conduct further review of our supervisory structure, and as we do that, we'll be making sure we have the right personnel in place to get the job done.
I hope that includes making room for the right personnel by removing the wrong personnel.
Senator Tim Scott and the Fed Vice Chair for Supervision, Michael Barr, at today's Banking Committee hearing. Later in the hearing, Senator Kyrsten Sinema, independent from Arizona, questioning Michael Barr about reform to better catch in the future when banks are in financial trouble and at risk for collapse.
Vice Chair Barr, it's good to see you. I was pleased to see you acknowledge the need for cultural and operational changes at the Fed, but the report was light on details. I recognize you're on a tight deadline, but now that the report is public, it's time to get specific with our goals, roll up our sleeves, and get to work. With respect to cultural and operational changes at the Federal Reserve, how are you defining success?
I think we need to have a workforce that's agile, that acts quickly and acts forcefully to prevent these kinds of problems in the future.
And how fast will you achieve that?
I think it will take time. I think cultural change is difficult, but I've started that work already, and I'm committed to getting it done.
But you have no timeline.
I do not currently have a timeline. That's the next step in the process after the SVB report was released, was to develop detailed work plans.
And I think that's what we need, are specific metrics. Rather than just a focus on outcomes, which say more about a business cycle, what we're interested in is a well-designed regulatory process. So here's a metric. Turnaround time is a problem at the Federal Reserve. The examiners found serious problems at Silicon Valley Bank, but the regulators were fatally late in responding. So following an examination finding, what is the median turnaround time for a Fed regulatory response?
Senator, I would say the bank was fatally late in responding to the supervisor's concerns, and when they were late, the supervisors did not escalate fast enough. The timing depends on the precise nature of the finding, so I can't give you an answer that would be generalizable.
Well, I understand you don't have an answer today, and that's all right, but I would like to get a more specific answer. More importantly, I'd like to know what you'd like the answer to be. Is it the answer, what will it be a year from now? What will the answer be 3 years from now? What will the answer be 5 years from now? Bank runs are happening faster than ever, and we need regulatory processes that can operate at the speed of business. In your last appearance before this committee, you and I spoke about how sometimes the length was 6 weeks between times of communication, including sending the communication through mail. We don't really live in that kind of a slow world anymore. When a bank run can occur in 4 hours, we probably should stop communicating over snail mail. So I recognize that the Fed must balance the need to be responsive with its historically deliberative approach to complex issues. So have you identified other metrics that will be used to measure success when enacting lasting cultural and operational change? And if so, what are those metrics?
As I said, Senator, the next phase in the process is to develop detailed work plans, and for each of those work plans, there will be metrics, but I don't have those for you today.
You don't even have general guidelines around what the metrics could be?
The three things, as I said, that we're most focused on in terms of supervision are increasing the agility of our workforce, increasing the speed of action, and increasing the forcefulness of action. And those will be, at a high level, the things that we're going to be looking for.
Michael Barr is Federal Reserve Vice Chair, questioned by Senator Kyrsten Sinema, independent from Arizona, at today's Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee hearing. This is Washington Today. A Reuters article, Dateline Tokyo, U.S. President Joe Biden and Japan's Fumio Kushida met for talks in the deeply symbolic city of Hiroshima on Thursday, aiming for closer cooperation in the face of an ascendant China and an unpredictable Russia they see as threatening the post-war order. The two met ahead of a 3-day Group of Seven, or G7, summit that starts on Friday in Hiroshima, the first city to be leveled by an atomic bomb. The two leaders made some comments at the start of their meeting, beginning with the Japanese Prime Minister.
The very foundation of peace and security in the Indo-Pacific. Japan and the United States have strong relationship not only in the area of security. We have close and strong cooperation in all areas. We very much welcome that the cooperation has evolved by leaps and bounds. Here in Hiroshima, the U.S. company Micron is engaged in leading semiconductor research, development, and manufacturing, and this is a great case of Japan-U.S. semiconductor cooperation, and Japanese government will continue to support Micron's efforts. And based upon our vision to develop an ecosystem for innovation and startups in deep tech, as we plan to create a global startup campus in central Tokyo, joint study with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the MIT, one of the leading universities of the United States, has commenced. By gaining cooperation from the United States, we will materialize such vision. Today, Joe and I will go over what we intend to discuss at the G7 Hiroshima Summit and engage in last-minute coordination. And at the summit, I'm confident that the G7 will demonstrate our unwavering will to uphold free and open international order based on the rule of law, a concept that we both share.
Well, Mr. President, it's wonderful to see you again, and here in your own hometown. And thank you for hosting the G7 summit here. Under Japan's leadership, we've already delivered progress on the G7 agenda this year, and I'm looking forward to our meetings in the days ahead. As you said back in January when you were at the White House, I think the quote is, we face one of the most complex environments in recent history, security environments. And I couldn't agree with you more. But I'm proud that the United States and Japan are facing it together. And, we stand up for the shared values, including supporting the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their sovereign territory, and holding Russia accountable for its brutal aggression. And we're tracking the global challenges from strengthening our community and our commitment to nuclear nonproliferation to ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific. That's at the heart of all this. And, it seems to me we're deepening our cooperation on emerging technologies, including new partnerships between the United States and Japanese companies, and as you mentioned, universities as well, in areas like quantum computing and semiconductors. And I want to thank you for Japan's commitment to increase investment in these areas. The bottom line, Mr. Prime Minister, is that when our countries stand together, we stand stronger. And I believe the whole world is safer when we do. So thank you again for having me here today, and we look forward to the next several days.
President Biden and the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kushida in Hiroshima, Japan, where that Group of Seven summit is being held. The other nations in the G7 are Germany, United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Canada. The U.S. Defense Department is responding to the news this week that superiors of Jack Teixeira, the Massachusetts Air National Guard member charged with leaking highly classified military documents in an online chat room, had been warned several times against abusing the access. Sabrina Singh is the Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary.
There's a paper trail showing that Jack Teixeira received multiple warnings about abusing his access to classified info. While there's an investigation into this ongoing, more generally, is it reasonable in the opinion of DOD for anyone to maintain access to their clearance under those circumstances?
I'm sorry, repeat your question from the top, that he still maintains access?
He maintained his access despite multiple warnings.
Okay, because he doesn't maintain his access currently right now. So again, as you mentioned right at the top, this is an ongoing investigation, not just by the Department of Justice, but the Air Force has also launched their own internal investigation. So that is what we're waiting for. That's exactly what this investigation will uncover. Is, you know, as you mentioned, there were reports filed by others in his unit citing some of these violations. And so what didn't happen when, that's part of what the report will uncover.
The Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh at her news conference today at the Pentagon. Associated Press writes about the multiple warnings to Jack Teixeira. The Justice Department lawyers made the disclosure in court papers urging a magistrate judge to keep Jack Teixeira behind bars while he awaits trial in the case stemming from the most consequential intelligence leak in years. The judge is expected to hear more arguments Friday on prosecutors' detention request and issue a ruling. Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh also asked today what changes, what procedural alterations have been made since Jack Teixeira's arrest.
Are there any DoD policy changes that have been made regarding the handling of or access to classified information in the wake of the leaks?
Well, pretty immediately we did, and I think a few of us have spoken to this, when the leaks first came to light, one of the things that we did was immediately cull down our email distro lists and updated those to make sure that there were active participants on that list, but also to make sure that the people who needed access to that information had that it was the right person part of those lists. We've also taken steps to limit printing capabilities. We've started to re-educate people on what it means to work in a classified space and handle classified information. For example, every time I open my computer right now, I get a notice that says you are in a classified space and therefore you should, abide by handling this information in the way that you've been trained to. So yes, there have been immediate steps. One of the benefits that we have is that there is an ongoing investigation with the DOJ and also the Air Force. So as the investigation continues and we get those results, of course we could make more adjustments, and that's sort of what leads to better practices in the future.
Sabrina Singh, the Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary, at her news conference today. And Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source. On C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio just got easier. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern, important congressional hearings and other public affairs events throughout the day, and weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Catch Washington Today for a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. CNN reports that 3 self-described FBI whistleblowers, who are key to the Republican narrative that the FBI is weaponized against conservatives, testified at a House hearing Thursday, the latest escalation of Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan's investigation into allegations of discrimination and bias within the FBI. The hearing came one day after the FBI said it revoked the security clearances of 3 agents who either attended the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol or espoused alternate theories about the Capitol attack, according to a letter the FBI sent the subcommittee on Wednesday, a copy of which was obtained by CNN. At least 2 of those agents, Marcus Allen and Steve Friend, were among the individuals testifying before the panel on Thursday. That reporting from CNN. Congressman Jordan opened today's hearing.
if you're not politically correct, you're not in line with what they think should be the political position, the proper position, you're the target. Parents attending a school board meeting, pro-lifers praying at a clinic, or Catholics simply attending Mass, you could be a target. And maybe what's just as frightening is if you're one of the good employees in our government who come forward to talk about the targeting, you then become a target. You face retaliation. If you're one of those, and I think there are thousands and thousands of good employees working across our country in the FBI and other agencies, but if you're one of those good employees driven by your commitment to the Constitution and your conscience and you come forward, they're going to come after you. If you come forward and tell us about the radical traditional Catholic memo, you come forward and tell us about this idea that they're going to create some snitch line to report on parents going to school board meetings, you do that, they will try to crush you. They will retaliate against you. They're coming after you. But these guys today, they were brave enough. They took their oath seriously. They believe in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the rule of law, and they came forward. And I want to thank them for doing it.
Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, chair of the House Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, part of the full Judiciary Committee. Congressman Jordan also chairs that committee, opening up today's subcommittee hearing. One of those witnesses, Steve Friend, a suspended FBI SWAT team member. A subcommittee report says that the FBI retaliated against Steve Friend after he expressed concerns about how domestic violent extremism cases were being labeled and managed, the excessive force used in apprehending January 6 subjects, and for making protected disclosures to Congress. Here's part of his testimony today.
In August 2022, I made protected whistleblower disclosures to my immediate supervisor, assistant special agents in charge, and special agent in charge about my concerns regarding January 6 investigations assigned to my office. I believed our departures from case management rules established in the FBI's Domestic Investigations and Operations Guide could have undermined potentially righteous prosecutions and may have been part of an effort to inflate the FBI's statistics on domestic extremism. I also voiced concerns that the FBI's use of SWAT and large-scale arrest operations to apprehend suspects who were accused of nonviolent crimes and misdemeanors represented by counsel and who pledged to cooperate with the federal authorities in the event of criminal charges created an unnecessary risk to FBI personnel and public safety. At each level of my chain of command, leadership cautioned that despite my exemplary work performance, whistleblowing placed my otherwise bright future with the FBI at risk. Special agents take an oath to protect the U.S. Constitution. The dangers of federal law enforcement overreach were hammered home to me when I was required to attend trainings at the Holocaust Memorial Museum and MLK Memorial. I cited my oath and training in my conversations with my FBI supervisors. Nevertheless, the FBI weaponized the security clearance processes to facilitate my removal from active duty within 1 month of my disclosures.
Steve Friend, one of the 3 FBI whistleblowers testifying at today's House subcommittee hearing. Another was Marcus Allen. More from the CNN article. The FBI officially revoked Marcus Allen's security clearance on May 3rd and listed a variety of reasons for doing so, including a September 29, 2021 email in which Marcus Allen called on FBI officials to exercise extreme caution and discretion in pursuit of any investigative inquiries or leads pertaining to the events of January 6, according to a copy of the letter. Marcus Allen also claimed to not find open source information about a subject who was allegedly involved in criminal activity at the Capitol on January 6th, but a separate FBI employee later found that the subject in question physically assaulted Capitol Police officers during the attack. And in revoking his security clearance, the FBI said its investigation showed Marcus Allen had questionable judgment, unreliability, and unwillingness to comply with rules and regulations, indicating that he could not properly safeguard classified or sensitive information. That from CNN. Returning to today's hearing, here's Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, Democrat from California.
Make no mistake, this hearing is a vehicle to legitimize the events of January 6th and the people who perpetrated it. And why? Because Donald Trump is running for president again. And if you normalize the events of January 6th, if you repeat his election fraud lies, then maybe he doesn't seem quite so extreme. Maybe it will be easier to overturn a free and fair election the next time. For those of you who have forgotten, on January 6th, a mob of people who believed Donald Trump's lie that the 2020 election was stolen, stormed the Capitol, seeking to stop the certification of the 2020 presidential election. They erected a gallows on the lawn just outside this room, and they ran through the halls looking to find and hang the Vice President of the United States. It was a shocking moment of political violence, and many of us on this dais, including myself, were there that day. We all felt the fear of knowing that there were people roaming the Capitol looking to kill us. But clearly, some of us have quickly forgotten that.
Congresswoman Alinda Sanchez, Democrat from California, at a hearing of the House Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. We covered it in its entirety on the C-SPAN networks. You can find the video at cspan.org. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, has introduced articles of impeachment against FBI Director Christopher Wray, Attorney General Merrick Garland, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia Matthew Graves, and President Joe Biden. She held a news conference. Here's the Congresswoman on why President Biden should be impeached.
It is with the highest amount of solemnity that I announce my intention to introduce articles of impeachment today on the head of this America at Last executive branch that has been working since January 20th, 2021 to systematically destroy this country. The President of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden. Joe Biden has deliberately compromised our national security by refusing to enforce immigration laws and secure our border, allowed approximately 6 million illegals from over 170 countries to invade our country, deprived Border Patrol of the necessary resources and policies sufficient to protect our country. And his administration has willfully refused to maintain operational control as required by the law. He has allowed fentanyl, the #1 killer of Americans between the age of 18 and 45, to overwhelmingly flood into our country and kill around 300 Americans every single day. These aren't just Americans, these are people's family members. These are their sons, their daughters, their brothers, their sisters, their mothers, their fathers, their cousins, aunts, and uncles. These are American families.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, at a news conference today in the U.S. Capitol building. She said that there will be further articles of impeachment introduced against President Joe Biden on other issues. At a separate news conference today, reaction to the articles from the House Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries.
Marjorie Taylor Greene has introduced a number of impeachment articles this week, including against President Joe Biden this morning. I'm curious if you have responses to that.
So I think it's an incredible contrast that on Wednesday, extreme MAGA Republicans in the House defend, coddle, and continue to play footsie with serial fraudster George Santos. And on Thursday, they want to impeach the President of the United States of America, the FBI director who was appointed by a Republican president, and the Homeland Security Secretary. And who is the face of this effort? Marjorie Taylor Greene. House Republicans have increasingly become the party of Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and George Santos. That is a very sad state of affairs.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the minority leader, at a news conference. A couple of stories from thehill.com. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, has filed a motion to have Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, expelled from Congress following the release of the Durham report, which she claims proves that Adam Schiff pushed lies about former President Trump's ties to Russia. And several Jewish Democrats in Congress called on Speaker Kevin McCarthy to censure Congressman Paul Gosar, Republican from Arizona, following reports that one of the Arizona congressman's staffers had previously expressed neo-Nazi and white supremacist beliefs. Story from the Washington Examiner. House Republicans passed a resolution condemning efforts to abolish the police, seeking to preserve resources that go toward local law enforcement, despite several top party members calling to defund federal agencies, such as the FBI and Justice Department. The bill is one of several pieces of legislation being introduced this week in tandem with National Police Week. That was from the Washington Examiner. Here's part of the House floor debate today. Congressman Ken Buck, Republican from Colorado, supporting.
House Concurrent Resolution 40 expresses our support for the brave men and women who serve in law enforcement across our nation. These individuals put their lives on the line every single day to protect our communities and keep us safe. And it is time that we acknowledge their selflessness and dedication. Law enforcement officers are the backbone of our justice system. They are the first line of defense against crime, and they work tirelessly to ensure that our neighborhoods are safe places to live, work, and raise families. While most people fear danger and flee, police officers rush towards the threat, and they do so without hesitation or reservation. They are truly the embodiment of courage and bravery. Unfortunately, over the past several years, we have seen an unprecedented level of hostility towards law enforcement in this country. The defund the police movement greatly fueled this hostility. We have seen police officers subjected to unwarranted scrutiny, harassment, and even violence. We have seen protests turn into riots, with law enforcement officers becoming targets of angry mobs. This kind of behavior is not only unacceptable, but it is also dangerous and destructive. It undermines the very fabric of our society and puts innocent lives at risk. As a former prosecutor, I am acutely aware of the vital role that law enforcement plays in keeping our communities safe. I have seen firsthand the sacrifices that these men and women make, and I am truly grateful for their service. That is why I am committed to doing everything in my power to support our law enforcement officers and to ensure that they have the resources and tools they need to do their jobs effectively.
Congressman Ken Buck, Republican from Colorado, today on the House floor. Opposing the resolution, Congresswoman Sidney Kamlager-Dove.
I rise today to strongly oppose this resolution, a deeply partisan messaging tactic from House Republicans who are more focused on inflaming divisions in our country than on working for the American people. If Republicans cared about public safety, they would work to address the gun violence epidemic in our nation, which even law enforcement says is out of control. And if they really cared about law enforcement, they would not try to defund agencies like the AFT and the FBI. This resolution is harmful and misleading. Violent leftist extremists and progressive politicians do not want to defund law enforcement. This characterization is a corrupt narrative that runs counter to the real conversations that Americans want to have about the issues their communities face. The true irony here is that in the same breath that they denounce these so-called violent leftist extremists, they stay silent on the extremists from their own party that stormed the Capitol and attacked the United States Capitol Police. Men and women still working here today, disrespected every single day by my colleagues' silence on this issue. Republicans are wasting time with empty bills and malignant rhetoric. Yes, absolutely, we should be investing in people's livelihoods. Why is that wrong? How come we cannot support good public safety and work to keep people alive? All people. A study just came out yesterday that said Black people are twice as likely to die than anyone else just because we are Black, and that includes interacting with law enforcement. I respectfully ask that we vote no on this resolution. Thank you, and I yield back.
Congresswoman Sidney Kamlager-Dove, Democrat from California, on the House floor. The House passed this resolution by a vote of 301 to 119, with 3 voting present. Congresswoman Cori Bush, Democrat from Missouri, has introduced a bill that calls for $14 trillion in slavery reparations for African Americans. She was joined by supporters at a news conference on Wednesday on the Capitol grounds. The supporters including Barbara Lee, Democrat of California, and Jamal Bowman, Democrat from New York. The Congresswoman saying the United States has a moral and legal obligation to provide reparations for the enslavement of Africans and its lasting harm on the lives of millions of Black people.
This is not just a matter of our country's history. but it is a matter for which America must provide reparations if we desire a prosperous future for all. We know that we continue to live under slavery's vestiges. We know how slavery has perpetuated Jim Crow. We know how slavery's impacts live on today, from the black-white wealth gap, to voter suppression, to segregation and redlining, to disparities in infant mortality rates and other health outcomes. When the black-white wealth gap is $14 trillion, it's unjust, and it wouldn't happen in a just and fair and equitable society. Let me just add. So those are not the natural consequences of human society. None of that. They are directly caused by our federal government's role in the enslavement and exploitation of Africans, of black people, throughout our history. Our federal government never saw fit on its own to rectify the immeasurable, the cataclysmic harms of slavery. But we're here now, and we're lifting up this mirror of a resolution so that America can face it and see, look in it and see our future. A future of healing, a future of repair, a future of accountability. We're not here to request that future. We're here to demand it. We need that future now. Reparations now.
Congresswoman Cori Bush, Democrat from Missouri, at a news conference on Capitol Hill on Wednesday. The Senate today confirmed Nancy Abudu, a lawyer for the nonprofit Southern Poverty Law Center legal advocacy group, to be a judge on the 11th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. The vote was 49 to 47. She'll be the first black woman to serve on the 11th Circuit. The vote was almost all party line. Republicans yes and Democrats no. Democrat Joe Manchin of West Virginia, the sole no vote on the Democratic side. A story from Reuters: Nancy Abudu was questioned sharply at an April 2022 Senate committee hearing about the SPLC's inclusion of prominent conservative groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom on its well-known annual list of hate groups. She said she was not involved in the creation of the list and that her work focused on racial justice and voting rights. And the Supreme Court with a couple of decisions today. This from the Washington Post. The court ruled for Google and Twitter in a pair of closely watched liability cases Thursday, saying families of terrorism victims had not shown the companies helped foster attacks on their loved ones. The court's narrowly focused rulings sidestepped requests to limit a law that protects social media platforms from lawsuits over content posted by their users, even if the platform's algorithms promote video that laud terrorist groups. That law is Section 230. Supreme Court also ruled that the late Andy Warhol infringed on a photographer's copyright when he created a series of silk screens based on a photograph of the late singer Prince. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word, to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.